Every single person deals with factors that are outside of their control. I've decided that I enjoy picturing these factors being determined by some massive cosmic dice out in the universe. And sometimes we don't know what those factors are there, what they are, or that they're there, and sometimes we do. And when we do, there's often ways that we can make them more manageable. In my life, when I was in high school, I was dealing with factors that I didn't know were there. I just knew that I was really struggling at school. I had a terrible time concentrating for whatever reason. I started really struggling academically, and up until that point, I had been a really good student, so that was a bit of an issue, and I got really frustrated with myself and frustrated with school in general, so I started cutting lots of class. And that didn't really help with the whole academic situation, and I got more frustrated, and I decided that I definitely, clearly was not cut out for attending school and succeeding at school in a traditional setting. And so I decided that I would finish out my high school career by taking a couple of online classes. And my father would be the first one to tell you that that didn't work out so well either. I didn't finish those classes, and because I didn't finish those classes for a couple weeks of my life, I didn't think that I was going to be able to graduate. I was very lucky that I had been enrolled in piano lessons from a young age, and when I was 15, I took a piano exam, and that was one of the best decisions I made because, as it turns out, I didn't think that I was going to be able to graduate, but I did graduate because that piano exam that I took when I was 15 gave me grade 12 course credit. And so in the spring of 2014, I walked the stage with my peers because of sheer dumb luck and piano exams. Given that bumpy ride, it's kind of ironic that I'm standing in front of you today as a fourth-year student heading towards a career in teaching. I wouldn't have thought when I was 17 that I was capable of the things that I've done since being brave enough to head back to school since graduating. First off, I was brave enough to head back to school. That was huge. I got into the Lethbridge College, and not only did I attend there for 2 semesters, but I made the honor roll list, which is still one of the things that I'm most proud of in my life because that was really big. And then I transferred to the university for my next year, and the university is big. The university is scary. I was very intimidated, but it didn't kill me, and I was able to find a new favorite cubicle in the university's library, which is a big deal for me if you know me. In the spring of 2019, I completed an applied study with the University of Lethbridge's History Department and the Galt Museum and Archives with the help of Christine Alexander and Ashley Henriksen, where I created the Harvest Program. It's a simulation board game program geared towards grade 5 students to teach them about farming in southern Alberta during the Great Depression. So it creates a whole environment of experiential learning on that topic. I started making this program. This whole process of creating Harvest is what got me thinking about uncontrollable factors in life. Because let me tell you, if anybody who has ever lived knows a thing or two about uncontrollable factors, it was farmers in southern Alberta during the Great Depression. Economic downturn, soil drift, and drought are now known as the 3 signature elements of that time period, and all 3 of them would have felt completely outside the realm of their control. When I started creating this program, my time was really split into 2 parts. First, I dove headfirst into the archives and started gathering all sorts of data and information to make this program as accurate and as historically grounded as possible for these grade 5 students. Then I conducted 4 oral history interviews and got stories from people who were children during the Great Depression and grew up on southern Alberta farms. And with the information that I gathered and the stories from the oral history interviews and the help of a brilliant graphic designer, I created 3 boards for this program based on 3 real southern Alberta families. The Smiths from Champion, Alberta, the Paxmans from Raymond, and the Butlers from Hill Spring. When the students come to the museum, the first thing that happens really is that they're broken up into family groups, and they take on the role of a real southern Alberta family and their farming operation during the Great Depression, and they make all sorts of decisions and choices trying to make it through to 1940 with money still in the bank. Like anybody, people living in southern Alberta during the Great Depression had choices to make. And so the children during the program have choices to make too, like what they want to grow, what crops they want to plant, if they want to raise cattle that year, and what bracket of living expenses they want to pay that year. They also have many things that are outside of their control. There were lots of things outside of control of farmers. Even today, farmers always have many things outside of their control. They're particularly vulnerable to teeny tiny things like the weather and outside elements, which is no big deal. But in the Great Depression, these elements were just increased. There were more things outside of their control, environmental, but other things too. And the event that really marks the beginning of the Great Depression isn't environmental, but economic, with the 1929 market crash. The students learn about this event by being shown the front page of the Lethbridge Herald from October 29th, 1929, and then they learn through experience what this means when they have to pay or they get their earnings from the 1930 harvest, and they're able to compare their earnings that they had just collected moments ago from 1929 with pre-market crash prices. And so there's a direct comparison, and I never have to explain any economic theory at all during the program, so that is a plus. There are also environmental factors that are outside of their control. This economic event happened all the way in New York, and so it makes sense that this would have been something completely outside the realm of their control, but it affects them nonetheless. Things much closer to home affected them just as much, and were just or seem to be just as far outside of their control, like dust storms and soil drift. And it's easy to understand why these things felt just as far outside their control when you see a picture like this one. These were huge, overwhelming environmental events that were just so widespread. I feel quite overwhelmed when I see these pictures. And I didn't grow up on a farm, and I didn't know lots of the things that I know now, and now I find myself getting a little bit annoyed at the term dust storm, which I never thought I would, because dust, when I think dust, I think the dust on my mantle. I don't think nutrient-rich topsoil that's completely essential for growing crops, and that's what these dust storms were made up of. It would pick up the surface of the land, blow it around, and deposit it in completely useless places, like on fence lines, like in this picture, or piled up in front of a house and almost covering a tractor, like in this picture. So this soil, after it's been picked up and blown around, you can't grow crops when it's in a state like this, in a soil drift. These things would have seemed completely outside the realm of the control of the individual Southern Alberta farmer in the Great Depression. And I'm sure that I would have felt completely overwhelmed and like this was something completely outside my realm of control if I was living at the same time. Yes, there's many more pictures like this one. I feel very humbled by them, very small. But it's very lucky that there were some people living at that time, like Charles Noble, who didn't look at these dust storms and soil drift as completely overwhelming, uncontrollable events, but as a puzzle to be solved. And so through lots of experimentation and trial and error, it was found that while the amount of rain or lack thereof was in fact outside of their control, there were things that could be done to prevent dust storms and soil drift. And so they could do strip farming and many other things. There were inventions that were made to prevent soil drift so we don't have dust storms like they did back in the 1930s. So this is complicated. Looking in the archives and finding all of these very complicated, real-life, messy things, and then thinking, oh, I need to make this into a simulation board game program for grade 5 students. I've never done anything like this before. I was a little bit overwhelmed at this task. One of the ideas that I had late at night when I was trying to sleep but was thinking about dust storms and soil drifts was to include a tally on the boards. And this tally keeps track of both the beneficial things that the students do for their farm, like gaining knowledge, and they get a positive token in their tally for those things. It also keeps track of negative things that happen, like dust storms and soil drifts, and they get negative tokens to keep track of that. And so the positive tokens and the negative tokens will determine the chances that they have of being successful. They influence their chances of being successful because the tally idea works hand in hand with another idea that I had to include 10-sided dice in the program. The dice are rolled when they're told that a dust storm has blown through their farm to determine the amount of impact that they felt from that dust storm that year. And then it's rolled again when it's time to harvest to see what price bracket they fall into. So they can do things to increase their odds. They can gain knowledge, they can be proactive in their success, but it's ultimately up to the dice, up to the cosmic dice, if you would, or the little 10-sided dice for this program. This is like real life, and how there are things that we can do to increase our odds of success, but it's ultimately up to the dice. When I was in high school, I didn't know what things I had on my tally. It turns out when I was 19, I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactive disorder. But up until that point, I didn't know that that was something on my tally. Today, some days I would put ADHD as a positive token on my tally. Some days I'd place it as a negative. But for the last 4.5 years, I felt really empowered knowing that it's something that I'm dealing with and something that I can be proactive in getting more positive tokens on my tally to increase my odds of success. Just like farmers in southern Alberta, they were trying to be proactive in finding ways to counteract soil drift and dust storms and being proactive that way. But ADHD didn't just affect me when I was in high school. It affects me every day today, but it also affected me when I was much younger, when I was a child, because I've always had ADHD, and I had much better bangs back in the day. But when I was 10, it's kind of funny now, but because of how my brain works, just like everybody has things that they're good at, things that they're not so good at. Because of my ADHD brain, that affected what things I decided I was good at and things that I decided I wasn't good at from a young age. When I was 10 years old, I decided that I absolutely was not cut out for designing board games. And that sounds very oddly specific, but I promise it's true. My little brother David, he was obsessed at that time with designing very complicated games with teeny tiny paper pieces and interconnected rules that I pretended like I understood and knew what was going on, but really didn't have any idea. I had decided that David's brain worked in a way that he could design board games, but my brain clearly didn't. But obviously I was wrong. Since being diagnosed with ADHD, I have felt empowered knowing what's on my tally and being able to counteract it with gaining knowledge and learning and progressing. Every single person deals with factors that are outside of their control that they didn't choose to be impacted by, and it's up to each one of us to try and be proactive in figuring out what those things are that are on our tally, and then learning and progressing to try and make them feel more manageable. It's also so important to look out for one another and to be kind to one another, because every single person has cosmic dice out in the universe and a tally that they're trying to get more knowledge pieces onto and more positive tokens onto. And we might not know what somebody is dealing with and what's on their tally that day. They might not even know what's on their tally that day. So it's important to be kind. I've really decided that life is like a board game, and that there are cosmic dice out in the universe, and it's up to each one of us to continue learning, continue to progress, and to look out for one another and to be mindful of what's on our tallies. Thank you.